Hey, and welcome back to my podcast, Marissa. If you're watching this and you've watched my previous episodes, you'll notice that I'm in a different filming location every single time. I told you from the start that I'm a creature of change, so you shouldn't be that surprised. I'm still trying to figure out where I want to film and what the right angles and the right lighting is, so I'm just having fun with it for now. This week we're doing another Game of Thrones episode from the book versus the show, and I do have podcast playlists in my account. If you search for this podcast, you should be able to find the playlist for the 4 different types of weeks. I have a playlist for each type of week. So I have a music playlist that involves the Taylor Swift stuff, a books versus shows playlist, I have a journals archive playlist, and I have the manifestation playlist. So feel free to check those out if you want to check out just the themes that you like to listen to in order. Again, if you're watching, in this episode, you might see my dogs running around because they just insist on being part of everything, especially the books episodes. I don't know why. But let's get into it. Moving forward, my plan is to cover at least 2 or 3 episodes of the show Game of Thrones in each podcast episode because there's a lot of episodes of the show and I have a lot to catch up on. I also am really eager to get to the House of the Dragon episodes and read that book, so I'm really trying to get through this quickly. So today we're tackling the show's Season 1, Episodes 2 and 3. Before we look at the plot, I do want to note that the ages of the girls come in during these scenes, and Sansa's 11 years old and Arya is only 9. Keeping that in mind completely changes how this story looks. But let's start with Daenerys over in Essos. The story opens up with the Dothraki traveling with Daenerys and Jorah and her brother Viserys. The book gives us this beautiful lore behind the Dothraki belief that the earth is going to be consumed by a massive field of ghost grass. I think ghost grass is likened to wheat fields, but that's just what we're familiar with. I'm sure it's some foreign, unfamiliar grain that we've never seen. Meanwhile, Viserys is already being a nightmare and picking at Ser Jorah for being a wanted smuggler in King's Landing. Somehow Viserys knows that Jorah is a criminal and is not welcome in King's Landing. The real shift in this story, though, is Daenerys and her growth. As she sits with her handmaidens who are patching up scars on her hands from riding so long, one of her handmaidens, called Doria, gives her a lesson in intimacy and lovemaking. In the book, when Dany puts this into practice with her husband Khal Drogo, that's the day that she conceives her baby, though we don't know that until the day of her 14th birthday. Now let's head back over to Winterfell and talk about the Starks and the Lannisters. Tyrion wakes up in a dog stall and immediately smacks Joffrey, which is just as satisfying in the book as it is in the show. But a major adaptation in this part of the story is that Cersei walks into Bran's bedroom while he's laying there unconscious and Cat is watching over him. And she tells Cat this story about her baby boy that she lost to a fever. This was not in the book, and I believe that this was only there in the show to build character development so that viewers wouldn't hate Cersei so much, and to give her a little bit of humanity and a potential for a character arc. As the party split up, Jaime teases Jon for all that he's about to give up to go to the Wall. But Jon shrugs it off. He doesn't seem to care. In the meantime, he has a secret project where he's having a sword forged for his little sister Arya. When he gives it to her, she names it Needle. Another part of the show that wasn't in the book is when Jon goes in to say goodbye to Bran. We see a lot more resentment from Cat towards Jon in this scene because he's not her child. But Jon says his goodbyes to Bran and then heads out. Moving down the road, Jon and Ned Stark part ways as Jon heads up to the Wall and Ned heads down to King's Landing. Jon asks about his mother, but Ned won't say a word. Instead, he promises that the next time that they meet, he will tell Jon everything. On the King's Road, Ned and the King are sitting for lunch, and they receive news that Daenerys has married and is pregnant. In the book, we find out that Ser Jorah is a double agent, and he's a spy for King's Landing, hoping for a royal pardon. In the show, I don't think that was revealed to us until much later on. Further up north, Jon and Tyrion are sitting at a campfire. Tyrion also teases Jon about the Wall and the monsters and the scary things that are up there that he thinks are just myths, and it clearly upsets Jon. Jon's direwolf Ghost senses that Jon is upset, so he tackles Tyrion to the ground. He didn't hurt him, but Ghost is much larger than Tyrion, so it completely terrifies him. One thing I really do appreciate about the books is that the dogs, or the direwolves, have a much greater presence in the kids' lives. Unfortunately, due to the CGI budgets, they weren't able to include that in the story in the show. So back in Winterfell, Cat hasn't eaten or slept in days. She's just been watching over Bran, hoping that he wakes up, and he hasn't. The Maester enters to talk about finances and what's to come of the lordship of Winterfell, but Cat snaps and doesn't want to talk about it at all. Robb comes in to save the day and dismisses the Maester, saying that they'll talk about it later, and then he notices through the window that there are some fires in Winterfell that he needs to address immediately. So he leaves, and Cat is left alone again with Bran. Suddenly, there is an intruder that comes in with a knife into Bran's room. Cat throws her bare hands onto the blade and hurts herself really severely. Just when all hope is lost, Bran's direwolf jumps in to save the day and tears out the assassin's throat. Shaken from this event, Cat is unconscious for 4 days. When she wakes up, she's in her own bed, surrounded by Robb, Theon, and Sir Roderick. She has a strong gut feeling that Bran didn't fall from that window. She suspects that he was thrown and that the Lannisters are conspiring against them. She tells the party around her that that's what she believes and decides that she's going to travel to King's Landing to tell Ned in person. She doesn't want to risk writing a letter and having that letter be intercepted by anybody. Down the road, Sansa has her first date with Joffrey. Everything from this scene in the show is true to the book, including how Arya disarms him and throws his sword into the river. After Arya's wolf, Nymeria, bites Joffrey, she sends Nymeria away so that she won't be punished or killed. And Arya runs away too, but she's gone for 4 days rather than just one evening like it says in the show. When brought before the king, Sansa famously lies, saying that she doesn't know about what happened between Joffrey and Arya, but she says it because she's too afraid to betray her beloved Joffrey. In the book for this scene, the king's brother Renly is actually present, and he mocks Joffrey for being disarmed by such a little girl in front of everybody that was there. This includes 50 of the Stark's men and all of the king's party that came from King's Landing to visit Winterfell. Because of that humiliation, Cersei's extra mad, and she demands that one of the direwolves be killed for payment for the hurt they caused Joffrey. Since Nymeria was gone, Sansa's wolf Lady was the only one left. Ned dared the king to do it himself since he passed the sentence, but the king shrugged and looked away, ignoring Ned completely. This episode ends with Bran just waking up, but the book gives us an entire chapter on what he was experiencing while he was unconscious. In the show, there's a three-eyed raven, but in the book, it's actually a crow. George R.R. Martin made this a crow because they're more mystical, but the show made it a raven because they're larger and look better on screen. Ravens also carry a much more stereotypical reputation with death and bad things. In the dream that Bran is having while he's unconscious, the crow tells him that he has to learn to fly. He says, "Fly or die." Bran is only 7, so he's taking this literally like, I'm a little kid, I don't have wings, I can't fly. But eventually he decides that instead of falling, he is going to try and fly. When he makes that decision in his dream, the crow starts scratching between Bran's eyes to make room for his third eye. Suddenly, Bran snaps awake, completely alone, and decides to name his direwolf Summer. So now for episode 3, let's head straight into King's Landing. Ned Stark finally arrives and is immediately called to the King's Council. They're planning this massive tourney as a welcome party for him, and he wants nothing to do with it. However, the king has already insisted that they do it, regardless of what Ned wants. Then the show features a scene where Cersei is coddling Joffrey and bandaging his hand. She tells him that he is going to be king someday and that he can make the truth whatever he wants it to be. This part wasn't in the book, but it does give us some insight as to why Joffrey becomes the monster that he becomes later on. Back at the castle, the Stark family sits down for dinner. In the book, this is not just a quiet gathering of Sansa, Arya, and their septa. It's a group of about 50 people that include the guards for Ned Stark, now that he's Hand of the King. Arya is consumed by guilt over the death of her friend Micah. This is the butcher's boy that the Hound had run down to punish for defying Joffrey. Arya is also really angry with Sansa for betraying her and lying, saying that she didn't know what happened. So Arya leaves dinner early and runs to her room, contemplating running away completely. She thinks about going to find Nymeria and just forgetting the rest of the world. But before she has the chance, Ned enters and tells her that Sansa lied because she had to, and that we all lie. 4 days later, he enrolls her into a dance class, which is actually sword fighting, but because of the royal company they keep, it's kind of frowned upon for girls to learn sword fighting. So he calls it dance class, but it's really sword play. And Arya loves it. She ends up practicing for 4 hours straight. Meanwhile, Catelyn Stark is traveling by boat, and she finally arrives in King's Landing to meet with Ned. She goes to a hotel first with Sir Roderick to get some rest, but Varys' little birds alert him that she's in town, and he has Littlefinger's men go and collect her. They take her to one of Littlefinger's brothels, and Ned is eventually brought into the scene too. The show's depiction of this was pretty true to the book. Kat expresses her concerns to Ned, and Ned sends her back home, promising that he'll find out the truth. We get a couple more show-only scenes here, like when Cersei and Jaime argue about why it was a bad decision to push Bran out of the window. That didn't happen in the book, and neither did the scene where Jaime and the king are discussing war stories, but this is given for character development as well, because these are clear villains of the story right now. So let's head back north to the Wall, where Jon and the other boys are freezing. Jon is immediately targeted as a misfit, even though literally all of the men at the Wall are misfits. He has had actual training at Winterfell growing up, and he's a much better fighter than everybody else. So they kind of gang up on him. They take him into the armory to beat him up, but Jon actually breaks Gren's wrist. In the show, Tyrion comes in to stop the fight, but it wasn't Tyrion in the book, it was the armorer. And the armorer tells Jon that he's actually a bully. Jon is offended and surprised by this because he thinks he's a good man and has no intentions of hurting anybody. But the armorer explains to him that he had a better childhood and upbringing than most of the boys that ended up at the Wall, even though he was a baseborn child. He was fortunate enough to have training with swords and learn royal etiquette and customs. Jon realizes that he is much more fortunate than these other boys. After a few more days, Tyrion decides that he's done being at the Wall and that he wants to go back home to King's Landing. Commander Mormont asks Tyrion to plead with his sister Cersei to send them more men for protection on the Wall, but Tyrion knows that she's not going to listen to him. Before he leaves, Tyrion visits Jon on his shift at the Wall, and Jon asks him to give some advice to Bran. Tyrion doesn't know what advice he could offer, but Jon says just give him advice. Finally, let's check back in with Daenerys. She is still on horseback traveling through the brush when Dany suddenly hops off her horse and wanders off alone. Viserys storms after her, completely fuming, and grabs her by the throat. In the show, Dany looks visibly frightened by this, but in the book, she is way tougher. This is the exact moment that her inner dragon wakes up. She shoves him off of her, which only makes him angrier. Before he can strike her again, one of the Dothraki men comes and grabs Viserys by the throat with his whip. In the show, Dany looks shocked, but in the book, she's the one commanding this. She demands that his horse be taken away from him and that he be forced to walk behind the entire party. In the Dothraki culture, being forced to walk means that you have no honor. She did this to put him in his place and remove any high thinking of himself that he had previously. He's now no better than any of the other Dothraki men and has no value. Viserys is publicly humiliated and is now known as the Walker. That's where we're going to have to stop for today, but at this point, the Lannisters are plotting, the Starks are divided, and the dragons are starting to wake up. I do have shorter versions of these episodes filmed on my TikTok. You are going to have to search a little bit for them because that was like 2 years ago that I filmed those. But make sure to follow along on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for the next episode. Thanks for hanging out with me and Cooper today, and we will see you next week.